Yeah. Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the meeting of the Governance and Audit Committee. Before we start, can I please remind everyone that this meeting is being live streamed and the recording archived for future viewing. If a participant wishes to speak, please use the raise hand function to alert me that you would like to speak. I will indicate when it is your turn to speak, so please then select the request to speak button, which will allow you to come on screen. Please ensure that all debate is raised verbally and not via the chat function. The chat function should only be used to highlight any technical issues and to get the attention of myself or a Democratic Services officer. If you do have a mobile phone, can you please put it to silent or vibrate? Thank you very much. If we go to the agenda then, item 1 is apologies for absence.
Just to say, Chair, that Councillor Wood is a bit delayed, as is Matthew Evans, but they both should be joining us when available, Chair.
Thank you, Gareth. Item 2 are minutes of the meeting held on the 18th of July 2024 for correctness only. Someone prepared to move, please? Thank you, Councillor Hooper. Seconded, Councillor Goodjohn. Anyone against? Nope. Thank you. That's carried. Next, item 3 is to receive any declarations of interest and the nature of such interest under the Council's Code of Conduct. Are there any declarations? No, thank you. There are none. Item 4 then on the agenda is the annual Corporate Safeguarding Report 23-24, a referral, I believe, from Cabinet to Committee. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Can everyone hear me? Okay, yeah, thank you. As you've mentioned already, this is the annual safeguarding report. And as I say, this is an annual report to update Cabinet specifically on the work that's been undertaken in relation to the corporate arrangements for safeguarding across the Council. And you'll also be aware that this report also goes to each of the scrutiny committees also. And then finally to, obviously, Governance and Audit Committee here. Just a bit of a caveat from my perspective, normally I present section C of the report to scrutiny and various other places, but what I will try and do is give you an update on all aspects of the report for information, and then we can deal with any questions afterwards. So in terms of the report, if I could go straight to section A, which relates to social services. So again, in respect of child protection registrations, the numbers again were similar to those that the Council have seen in similar years. So again, there's no apparent escalation in numbers in relation to those child protection registrations. In relation to safeguarding referrals, again, the Directorate saw quite a significant increase in the numbers. Again, when the Council set new arrangements, I think they came in force back in 2019, and that because of the changes in procedures, those numbers increased. But actually, probably what we're trying to say is the numbers increased and they've just stayed high, I suppose, since that period. You know, they leveled out, but stayed pretty high level. In relation to Section 5 allegations against those in positions of trust and practitioners, again, the Directorate continued to see an increase in the number of referrals, particularly those that were then going on to that process. And as a consequence, the Council was looking at its structures internally, again, to assess the current resources on how it structured its teams and to meet that increased demand. The Council also continued its engagement and participation with the arrangements of its Regional Safeguarding Board, and again with the Director of Social Services for the Vale, remaining as Chair, again, of the Regional Safeguarding Board. So again, that's actively, you know, again, contributing to the priorities of delivery, again, of the regional annual plan. And again, that's quite useful, again, from the Vale perspective, that we still maintain presence on that board as well, and the chair of it as well. I think one bit I wanted to sort of mention again, it was part of that particular social services bit, that a review is currently being undertaken in relation to the largest reported area of abuse, being neglect within the 85 plus age year sort of group. I think what that demonstrates is the majority of the abuse reported was taking place in individuals' own homes for that 85 year age group. So again, there is a review taking place within the Social Services Directorate, again, just to monitor that within that area. Under section B, then under learning skills, a lot of actually work we do with learning skills relates to section C on the next bit around safe recruitment, which we'll deal with in that stage. Just again, some headline figures. There have been 27 referrals made under section 5 again of the Wales safeguarding procedures, and that relates to allegations of professional conduct. And again, the report identifies again those specific numbers within that. I don't want to go into too much detail because it's obviously in the report already. And again, in February 2024, again, saw the publication of the reviewed Vale Glamorgan Trans Inclusion Schools Toolkit. And again, that was a guide to support transgender and gender variant children and young people in school. And again, that was updated again to provide information and guidance and support to education professionals, to learners and to parents as well. So again, I think that's been seen as a real positive again as part of that review. And again, finally, again, in learning skills, the mandatory annual safeguarding training, again, is delivered across the directorates. And again, the standards are set by the Cardiff and Vale of Glamorgan Regional Safeguarding Board. And again, we're talking about that being an IDEV module, again, which is an online module, which is fine, again, for individuals with access to IDEV and online. So again, there's more work being carried out to make sure that some of our frontline workers that haven't got access to IDEV, again, are able to conduct and complete this safeguarding training across the authority. Okay, so I just move on to section C. Again, this relates a lot to our area around the safe recruitment aspects. Again, very similar figures to previous years where the overall compliance rate is 99%. Haven't quite hit the 100% yet, but we're getting close. So in terms of corporate appointments, that is at 100% compliance, and schools appointments at 98% compliance, again, given the overall 99%. Just looking at some of that data, the schools had a total of 7 breaches during the 2023-24 year. But again, as we've explained previously, as soon as breaches are identified, risk assessments are put in place until those checks are completed. We obviously liaise immediately with our safeguarding team, again, within learning and skills specifically, and together with the head teacher and business manager of the school. And I can almost say that we almost provide daily contact with those schools, with the head teacher, with learning and skills to make sure those the checks are being progressed, the risk assessments are being followed, and make sure that those checks are in place right up until we haven't yet hit the 12-week mark where potentially termination of contract is sort of discussed. I don't think we've ever hit that level yet, and just because we're constantly trying to get those checks in place as part of that safeguarding those breaches. In terms of those 7 breaches, again, I can't go into too much detail in terms of which schools and so on, just obviously for the confidentiality, but I can tell you that those 7 breaches equated to 5 schools. That was one high school and 4 primary schools that related to. And then finally, in terms of section D under environment and housing, actually it links a little bit to section C under our safeguarding and our recruitment processes. But actually we're doing a lot of checks under our cleaning service sort of process at the moment. We're having a lot more SLAs being brought back in-house from a cleaning service department, which is, again, I think good news from an authority perspective that the schools are coming back in-house. But what that does generate, of course, is, I suppose, a lot of activity in terms of 2Ping those staff from those cleaning companies back into the council and undertaking those checks around DBS and references for those individuals. So we're just, again, making sure that those processes are in place that are really slick so we can get those workers in. And of course, you understand the cleaning service, they are frontline, lower paid positions, so actually the turnover of those staff is quite significant. And therefore, actually, we've met with the cleaning service and trying to put in place some, really good processes to get those recruitment activities sort of working really, really well, just because of the higher turnover than the normal council departments. In terms of other sort of sections, again, within environment and housing, so the staff from housing are represented on the Cardiff and Vale Regional Safeguarding Board, which again, a lot of different departments are. But what they've done also is created some more local safeguarding groups, so they can actually discuss, I suppose, issues that are more relevant to more local sort of areas, rather than having it just as a broad group. So that's again recently started. So again, hopefully that will improve some of that safeguarding reporting and reviews as well. I think in the report it may mention, I think, again about the resettlement schemes. Again, those have expanded, and again the need for training on honour-based violence and forced marriage has been identified. So again, there's some additional training being discussed again with Welsh Government to review that specific training to be provided in that area. And I think again it's worth mentioning that shown in one of the tables in the report under the housing department that the majority of referrals are made by the housing solutions team, which again is due to the team completing and submitting, it's called MARFs, which are the multi-agency referral forms for all children placed in temporary accommodation, again including the council's homelessness hostel as well. I think there's been queries on why that takes place, I think, but I think the information from that, I suppose, is it's class multi-agency, that anyone placed in temporary accommodation, I think, again, it's handy that different agencies, whether they're involved in that particular temporary accommodation for children, whether involved or not, it's handy that they're aware that takes place. I appreciate there is a lot of work around completing that information from the directorates, but again, I think it's one of those things that it's probably it's better to do than not do, even though it's a recommendation rather than something that we have to do. And I think the final report, I suppose, section then again under environment and housing is within our shared regulatory service, our SRS, where again a lot of the time that they are responding to instances of doorstep crime and scams and information. So again, they're trying to support a lot within that area. Again, there's lots of data in that report which I don't want to regurgitate sort of now. But again, it's just picking out some of the work that SRS colleagues are doing in that safeguarding arena as well. So again, just a quick top store of some of the key bits from that report and the sections from the different directorates. But again, I'm happy to take any questions, and if I can't respond to any, if they're too specific to what I know, then I'm happy to take that back and get a response to you.
That's lovely. Thank you very much for that. Some questions, Councillor Hooper?
Thank you for that. And I think this was a really interesting, well put together report, by the way. I think it's something that carried through. There was a narrative that carried through, and I think that's sometimes unusual with some reports we get. So commend everyone who was involved with it. I've just got a few things I think they're queries to understand a little bit more. And I think you made reference to adult abuse in own homes. And I'm not sure the table actually matches that, because it was a question I wanted to ask. Excuse me. And it says, you talked about the over 85s are the group who are suffering abuse at a higher scale. And then the next slide actually talks about the numbers who are in their own home. And I think that's of the whole cohort rather than being of the narrow cohort. And I'd be really interested to understand whether the over 85s are also in their own home or they're not, because clearly that's an area of concern. Appreciate you may not be able to answer that now, but it feels like there's just an opportunity to know a little bit more. The second one, I think this is in your field, is the compliance tables. And I'm a little bit lost. So you've got number of new starters and say table 2, number of new starters and safe recruitment. The 22 and the 21, are they related to April 23 to March 24 or April 22 to March 23? Because I would have thought we'd have the most up-to-date figures, and yet the percentages, unless I'm losing my, they're often the wrong way round. So I just don't know. That's probably a bad one, actually, because that one is the right way around. So maybe it's the first table. So the first table, so it's got April 40, number of new recruits 44, number of employees with documentation 43. So that would equate to 98, I reckon. And then it's down as 100 for this year. So I think those tables are the wrong way around. So switch those around would help. Last point, and this is a real concern, and it comes out of the environment and regeneration part when they talk about the hotels for homeless people. And we talk about the increasing number of children and families going into hotels. And there's a bullet point, 2 points after that, that talks about the requirements for the drug rehabilitation teams to come in and to give advice on disposal of sharps. Now, I just think contextually, it feels like we're putting children into areas of extreme potential harm. And I just think it's something that this committee needs to reference as a concern and a note of real caution. And for me personally, it's, I find these things quite horrific that children could be exposed to this quite early on. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Hooper.
Yeah, thank you for those questions. I think you're probably right. There's probably a couple I will need to take back, sort of on that, especially around the 85 plus in their own home, and see where that data sort of lies. So I'm sure we can clarify where that goes. And again, I think you're right about the table. I think those figures have been transposed. So again, we can look at those and provide an updated sort of table on that. But I think you're right. I think the data's correct, but just the other way around. And again, I think the section there where the is it on page 32? Is that the third bullet point? Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So again, we couldn't have to take that back if that's okay, and then we can clarify again what that situation is that you raised. Okay.
Councillor Prothero.
Afternoon, evening rather, Chair and Laith. My questions relate to the safeguarding reports that we've talked about with social services. First of all, with the adult social services, and 825 safeguarding reports with 300 moving to inquiry, and a 99% completion within the 7 working days timescale target. And I understand from the report that last year it was a 72% achievement against the target. So I think that in itself has to be commended, because that is a really incredible, improvement to this when we know that this resource is absolutely stretched. So it's just to say that's really impressive. And I want to compare it with the children's services and ask a question, if I may, as well. So out of those 546 strategy meetings that progressed to inquiry, 213 of them progressed to initial child protection conference, but there is no data or any explanation about if there are targets for timescales. And I would imagine with the children's services, time is of the essence, and it's just as important. So I'm just questioning, are there targets for completions of these different stages of reports, and how are we doing against them if there are? Thank you.
Laith, do you need to go back? Yeah, Councillor Prothero, I think Laith needs to go back to social services to address that question to the director and the team, and obviously we'll come back. It can be noted when we refer it to Cabinet, or back to Cabinet anyway, but it does need to be addressed. Okay, thanks. Are there any other questions? No, I've got just a couple of questions. In paragraph 2.3 of the covering report, which went to Cabinet, it says during 22-23 a Cabinet decision was made that all elected members upon appointment complete a basic DBS. and then those who hold a specific role and responsibility complete an enhanced DBS check. Is that lawful on the basis that an enhanced check, a DBS check for working with children and vulnerable adults, an enhanced check, basically covers you if you're going to be left alone with those individuals? So if you're actually going to be left alone in an environment where they are on a one-to-one basis, then obviously you would need an enhanced DBS check. But if you're actually just holding a role and responsibilities, do you actually need a check? And I only raise this because I did a DBS check many years ago for an escort in a taxi. And they were never left alone. And actually, I was challenged by DBS. They came back and said, actually, you running a check, which is actually unlawful. You can't run it because obviously you don't meet the criteria. These individuals are not going to be left alone with these vulnerable adults. So I'm just wondering, obviously I don't know now because whether DBS have changed the criteria or does the criteria still exist and therefore you're carrying out DBS checks where there's no requirement to do so? That's my first question. I should imagine you can deal with that quite quickly.
Yeah, so it's like what you say. When you take out an enhanced DBS, and we have checked this out from a councillor perspective, and actually different authorities and different councils have different views on this. Some do, some don't, and I think that's probably where the guidance is a little bit sort of woolly. But we have checked this out with the DBS, and actually when you undertake an enhanced DBS, you can actually decide to do a check against the barring list. So actually, there's almost two different levels within enhanced. You can do enhanced check without barring and enhanced check with barring. And of course, we wouldn't do it with the barring because that is in relation to people being left completely alone with children or vulnerable adults. So we've made a decision that we'll do and again, this is only for checks when you're sat on certain committees, where sometimes you may be in contact with certain confidential data. Some again, you'd be looking at some data or possibly even some personal data of cases. And that's the reason why the council made a decision to do the enhanced check on that basis. But we would do enhanced check without the barred list.
The general one for all councillors, which is the basic DBS check.
Yeah, and actually anyone can have a basic DBS check, and actually individuals can request a basic DBS check themselves. They don't need actually a company to actually do it on their behalf.
Lovely, thank you. The next question is and this is a general question across all directorates and actually in regards to schools and teaching staff, etc. There's a requirement obviously to have a DBS check, if you're becoming a teacher or a learning support assistant or working within schools and similar, if you've got roles within the council which cover exactly the same. The DBS check is only as good as the day it's done. So it's like an MOT really. It's done on day one and that's it. Is there any requirement in any of the provisions of learning in the education department or schools or wherever that these DBS checks actually should be done on a rolling 3-5 year term? Or is it the fact that you do one and that's it? So if there are any issues that arise with an individual, it's down to the individual to actually make you aware that they've done something inappropriately or they've been found, they've been subject to proceedings or whatever. And I'm just wondering what the risk is on that.
Okay, yeah, thank you, Chair. There's different processes again for the council. So in terms of the ongoing checks that we do for staff, that's only that we undertake those for staff covered under the Care Inspectorate for Wales. So again, the areas where they get inspected on a regular basis, and that would be our care homes and various other teams. So that is our legal requirement. There's only those areas that need 3 yearly sort of checks. Schools aren't under that bracket. So actually, you're quite right from the school's perspective. You get the DBS check when they commence, and they could be here for 10, 20 years in the same job, and we wouldn't actually require a new DBS check. Now, there's different, I suppose, processes now, because some people are on the update service. So once you get your DBS check, you've got so many weeks to sign up to the update service, and that means that becomes their DBS check, and any employer can check that online, and that's up to date as and when they do it. I think we're trying to get more staff to join the update service as much as possible. We've got a lot more communications to do that, as you can imagine. But again, I suppose there's different rules, isn't there, I suppose, around if someone is committed a crime during that period and we haven't gotten up to date, because you're right, it's out of date as soon as it happens anyway, to a certain extent. So there's a couple of things that happen. Number one, yeah, you're quite right. The individual has a duty to advise the council that something has happened, and therefore it could have an effect on their check. From an education perspective, they're also members of the EWC, the Education Workforce Council. So there's rules around if any disciplinaries take place with a member of staff that's under that EWC registration, that we've also got a duty to advise the EWC and therefore the DBS as well as part of that process. But also, actually, we've also had instances where even if the individual hasn't advised the council that an issue has taken place, we do get contacted by the police as well, because as part of their investigation, they're likely to find out that, you know, they work for the council, they work for the Vale, and therefore either myself or the head of HR are the main contacts, again, from a police perspective, that they contact us with that information for us to deal with it in that direction. So I think there's, again, to me, having that renewal isn't always, I say the best thing, but as said, as soon as it happens, it's out of date. But there's lots of mechanisms that take place for us to get advice of any issues.
That's okay. Obviously, the renewal is £13 a year, so someone's got to pay 13 quid a year to do that. And I think I'm just wondering whether, on a risk basis, whether there's sort of a dip test done of staff, maybe who are covered, just to do, you know, this. You know, I'm not saying to put a shot across the bows, but actually we're going to test 10 people in the authority on a, you know, not saying names out of a hat or whatever, just to make people aware of that requirement to notify people.
Yeah, thank you for that comment. I think that'd be something maybe that Cabinet or something could reference back to the safeguarding group for them to get their understanding of how that would work. I think that'd be useful.
On the council spending thousands of pounds on it, but there is a risk to it, and you know, I understand. The other question, which just a point of, I'm being pedantic now, and I haven't got a page on the report. It's the adult workforce, and it's the third paragraph. We're using numbers throughout the document, so we got 94 strategy meetings, 110 strategy meetings, and then we got 41% of carer support workers working with adults at risk were referred. The question I pose is 40% of what? That's just, is that all right? Because it's not mentioned anywhere else. You've kindly done all figures everywhere else, but that's okay. Yeah. Okay.
No, we can ask that question. That's fine.
That's okay. Thank you. Councillor Norman.
Thank you, Chair. Just a quick reference. I retired from school 16 years ago now, but at the time, all support staff were actually retested on CBS checked every 3 years. I don't know if this still goes on, as I retired 16 years ago, but at the time, all support staff, not the teaching staff, but support staff in the schools were tested every 3 years.
Thank you for that, Councillor Norman. Yes, I think each council does something different, but it's down to your policy. So that's that. Okay, I think that's some questions. Any comments? I have a comment based on what Councillor Hooper said in regards to bed and breakfast accommodation and young people going into that. Now, that's single young people between the ages 16 and 18 primarily. And I only make a comment on this basis that, again, in a previous slide, we were working with Llamau, and we as a council had put a young person into bed and breakfast accommodation, and the accommodation was quite appalling. And it was very embarrassing because Michael Sheen was there as an advocate for young people. And they said one local authority in Wales did this, this and this, and that was okay. And then all of a sudden they mentioned the authority it was, and I was there as a, as a representative. And I posed a question as soon as I got back to my team of, within a team of individuals who's placed these people. And the question I asked was, would you put your son and daughter in this accommodation? And the response came back, no way. So if they wouldn't put their son and daughter in this accommodation, then why should we as a council put other people in this accommodation? And I only make that as a comment, if that can be fed back, great. But I think that proves a point in the respect that, some of these are the most vulnerable young people in our society and in our community, and we're putting them into a position of risk. I know that, bed and accommodation and facilities are extremely difficult to obtain, but, we've, as a council, we've got a duty to look after these youngsters if we're going to do that. Yeah, I don't want you to comment on it, but if that could just be fed back, obviously feed it back to Cabinet as well, because maybe they'd like to take it on board. Okay, if there are no other comments, no. Obviously, we've got no recommendations here. So shall we say that the committee notes the contents of the report and that the comments made by members be referred to Cabinet for consideration? Members happy with that? Someone move. Councillor Goodjohn, can I have a seconder? Councillor Hooper. Anyone against? Nope. Thank you very much. Leith, there we are. You can leave now. You can stay if you want, but if you want to go, then thank you for your contribution and for updating the committee. Grateful. Next item is item 5 of the report, which is a draft Little Morgan annual self-assessment 23-24. And this is again a referral back to us from Cabinet, I believe. Yeah. Tom.
Thank you, Chair. And yeah, good evening, members. As you say, Chair, this is a reference from Cabinet to your committee. It's been to all scrutiny committees this month as well. And just to give you a bit of background, self-assessment is a core part of the statutory local government audit, regulatory and inspection processes in Wales. As you and committee are aware, the Local Government and Elections Act that was introduced in 21 requires the council to keep performance under review, to consult on that performance and then to formally report it. And to do that by self-assessment on an annual basis. And I'll talk a little bit around the self-assessment report initially, and then also that legislation requires us to respond to a panel performance assessment once every electoral cycle, and I'll touch on arrangements that are being made for this council's panel performance assessment as part of this presentation as well. So attached to the Cabinet paper, you've got at Appendix A, the annual self-assessment report, which relates to 23-24, and that's a statement of performance over that year in terms of delivering the commitments and priorities that are contained within the annual delivery plan. Those actions and measures are reported for consideration by scrutiny committees early in the calendar year, approved then by Cabinet, and they are what form the basis of the quarterly performance reports that go to each scrutiny committee. Importantly, this document obviously is a backward-looking document, but more importantly than that, what it does is enable us to identify areas for improvement. They're then carried forward into the next annual delivery plan. At the moment, we're putting together the draft of the next 5-year corporate plan. That's going to be out for consultation in the next few weeks. So this annual self-assessment has provided some of the basis for putting that report together. The Local Government and Elections Act have got 3 performance requirements that are pertinent to self-assessment. They look at consideration around delivery, so that's what's contained in the annual delivery plan, the use of resources, and thirdly, around governance and decision making. So that you'll see within the report, members, that there are 3 main judgments which are made, and they relate to each of those performance requirements. Annual self-assessment is a big process. It draws on a huge range of different information and sources. Some of those are listed in paragraph 2.3, including all of that performance work, the work of internal audit, the annual governance statement, the work that our regulators do, and also a huge amount of engagement and consultation work. And this is something that I think your committee may have commented on last year, certainly other scrutiny committees did, and we've sought to strengthen the information and content relating to engagement and consultation this year. So not only is there a dedicated section relating to all of that information, there's also specific wellbeing objective related engagement and consultation information contained throughout the plan. So hopefully members can see the breadth and the impact of that activity and what it's made. The report is a corporate summary. It draws together the information based from 5 directorate level self-assessments. Directorate management teams produce a self-assessment or reflection document. That's then challenged by another director, the chief executive, the leader, relevant cabinet members, and also the relevant scrutiny chairs. The results of that process are then moderated across the 5 directorates, and they then, along with those information sources, form the basis of the self-assessment report that you've got in front of you this evening. So this year's report gives you an overview of the work that was undertaken to meet the critical challenges, those around organisational resilience, tackling the cost of living crisis and the climate and nature emergencies. The report then talks about a summary of progress that's made against last year's areas of improvement that were identified. That's a statutory requirement. We then talk about performance against the annual delivery plan commitment, and then give an overview in terms of our use of resources and governance. So in terms of the actual judgments that are reached as part of the self-assessment report, the first relating to delivery of the annual delivery plan, and the judgment that is proposed in this document is that good progress has been made in delivering those annual delivery plan commitments. 85% of the 591 planned activities and measures have been delivered on target, and the areas of underperformance, so those 15% that haven't gone as planned, have now been reflected as areas of improvement. In terms of the second set of requirements, which is around the use of resources, again, an overall judgment of good has been attributed to the Council's use of resources. However, members will note within this report that whilst the use of resources is made up of a series of different aspects like assets, engagement, finance and procurement and people, as well as I said, the engagement piece, a judgment of fair has been attributed to the work around finance and procurement. I think that is reflective of the current situation in terms of pressure on council budgets and the need to deliver significant financial savings. And then similarly, a judgment of fair has been attributed to the engagement and consultation aspect of use of resources. And again, that's in recognition of the discussions that have happened in this committee, the scrutiny committees, the Council's response to the Let's Talk About Life in the Vale survey, and the very clear ambition that whilst there are some really good pockets of best practice or good practice in the authority, we want to do more. So that's the second of those performance requirements. And then just finally, in terms of the governance aspect, drawing on the annual governance statement, which provides reasonable assurance for the Council, and the Head of Internal Audit statement on governance and risk management and internal control effectiveness. Again, we've attributed a reasonable or good judgment to that aspect of the report. We're bringing it to your committee as part of the current consultation process, Chair. We've been doing some work in terms of engaging with partners, staff and the public, as well as consulting on on this document with them over the last couple of months. Your committee have a particular role within the legislation that you are required to have a draft of this report and for any comments that you make to be considered by Cabinet. If you make comments and or Cabinet determine not to respond to them, Cabinet need to explain to your committee why they are not going to do that. That's drawn directly from the statutory guidance to the legislation. So the report is being brought to you this evening. The consultation, as I say, is underway. It's then going to come back to Cabinet. It'll come back to your committee as well later on in the process before it then goes on to full council just before Christmas. So that's the annual self-assessment. I briefly mentioned the fact that this is something that we do internally every year. Once in each electoral cycle, we're required to undertake an external panel peer assessment or external panel performance assessment, rather. We're currently discussing the arrangements with the Welsh Local Government Association with that assessment scheduled to take place week commencing the 11th of November. Once the arrangements are confirmed in more detail, Chair, we'll be making sure that all elected members, including lay members of the Council, are made aware of those arrangements and briefed thoroughly. Elected members and lay members will also have an opportunity to participate during that panel assessment, and yourself as chair of the Governance and Audit Committee will have a specific opportunity to meet with the panel as well. So that's an overview really quickly of a very big detailed report, and I'll do my best to answer any questions.
Yes, thank you, Tom, for that. Obviously, it is a big report, 116 pages. Well, the report, the self-assessment report is 116 pages, and you've got covering details as well. But thank you for taking us through that. Councillor Goodjohn.
Thank you, Chair. Can I start by saying that whatever comes next, this is a big improvement on last year, in my opinion. It's a big, and that was a big improvement on the draft report of that year. Okay, so the progress of change has been good, but I have a few questions. To start off with, can you explain to us in some more detail what the moderation process was and who was included in that process?
Yes, certainly. Thank you, Councillor Goodjohn, and thank you for noting the changes that have been made. We genuinely take it really seriously when members provide comments, so thank you for that, and I'll pass that on to the team. The moderation process that you're asking about relates to the end of the directorate challenge process. So 5 individual directorate self-assessments are undertaken. As directors, we're given a set of presentation guidance, notes that help us to present the directorate self-assessment to the members and officers that I mentioned in the presentation. During that, inevitably, there are questions, comments, additional information is sought. We delve into things. It is a fairly forensic process that is undertaken in order to test the opinions and conclusions that we're drawing as individual teams. So at the end of that process, with a write-up of the notes from each of the sessions, we then have some moderation guidance which looks at each of the different aspects. So if you take the different use of resources categories, we then bring all of those together. And looking at the notes from each of the sessions, we look at actually, well, was what I went into my session initially saying, and I might have judged myself to be fair, is that on a par with other colleagues, and is that consistent with the notes that were taken during the meeting? Because you're creating those directorate self-assessments on an individual team basis. So post-challenge, it makes sense to do that moderation piece. The moderation is done by the Chief Executive and the leader. It's supported by myself and also a member of staff from the performance team. So that member of staff and myself provide the advice, if you like, in terms of the process, and the Chief Executive and the leader then look at the content of each of those sessions. they are the two people who are, in effect, the constant throughout the process, but aren't directly involved in the production of each individual self-assessment report.
Thank you, Chair. That's extremely interesting of who's making the final decision with these moderations, because there's a narrative in the document. We'll take engagement because it was brought up a corporate performance, and I thought there was an actually really good point there by some of the members there, that we have this narrative coming through of here is all the engagement that we have done. Here's everything in a huge list that has happened, all the positive things. And then at the very end, we come to the moderation process and it says, well, actually, if you take it on a whole because of one or two small issues, that is kind of very brief, we're actually going to moderate this from good to fair. I don't think there's a proper reflection in that. In overall, as a council, what are we doing? What are we doing for the county? I'll bring up another example because maybe we can make some comments on this, is procurement, finance and procurement. Because overall we're good because we view the way that we're dealing with our finances as good. And then, okay, well, again, because of external circumstances, not under our control, but we have huge financial pressures, therefore we're going to moderate down to fair. And that's a really interesting point of view of going from how do we feel we're doing to how does the county feel that we're doing for the county and for everyone inside of it. And I'd love some more detail as to why those decisions were made and how can we implement that process further down the chain rather than having to, at the last minute, in this enormous process of gathering data, the last minute having to go, well, actually, if you look at it from a citizen's, from a regular council user's point of view, actually, overall, we could have done some things better. I also want to pick on a couple other points just very quickly. It really confused me. The Twitter poll. Do we know how many people responded to the Twitter poll? Because that wasn't anywhere. And I'm personally quite confused as to why it's included at all, because it's not statistically significant or representative or balanced. The other thing is the champions. I was quite interested in the engagement work by champions as very commendable. All of the engagement work has been put into this list. I don't know who's written the list of the engagement work that's done, but it definitely doesn't include everything that I do or that other champions do. And it doesn't include what is the potential of the champions network, which hasn't been properly running for the last many months. I think has only recently started back up again, and the work that the champions can do overall. So I'm interested in that as well.
Thank you, Councillor John. We're going to make out of that now, Tom.
Thank you, Councillor Goodjohn. Sorry, I was just making sure that I got everything in the right order to come back to you. I do have some data that I can share with members relating to those Twitter polls, but also the polls on LinkedIn. With your permission, Chair and Councillor Goodjohn, I was given this information from colleagues ahead of corporate performance and resources last week. So as it's still running, there'll be additional figures, so I could get the most up-to-date numbers for you. They're not significant figures in terms of the amount of engagement via Twitter. I think, as we've discussed in other forums, the kind of engagement and reach via X has kind of gone off a cliff. What we are seeing is so much better engagement via LinkedIn, but I can certainly get that data and share it with you as well. I think it's a really interesting point that you raise in terms of the report not covering everything in relating to champions roles. What we've sought to reflect in here is where corporately we've supported that champions network to consider issues, and I think that's an appropriate thing for us to do. However, I am aware that champions do a huge amount of other engagement and outreach work. So perhaps something for the network actually is for us to pose the question, how do we reflect that in future annual self-assessments? I think that's a good challenge to give us. I think the question that you posed, Councillor Goodjohn, around the moderation of the judgment in terms of engagement, I think it's fair to say that that was recognising that across the piece there's some really good examples of engagement, but there's also a genuine desire to do more of that and to do it better. And some of that is in response to exactly the issues that you are posing in terms of how does that feel to our residents, and that's the reason for so much of the information from Let's Talk About Life in the Vale featuring within the report. The procurement piece, I think it's important to see finance and procurement together in this. And actually, yes, we delivered a balanced budget, but there's significant strain. And a significant amount of savings to deliver. In terms of procurement activity, this is the year where we joined the shared partnership service with Ardal. And again, I don't think we've made quite the progress in that area that we were expecting to. So I think they're the reasons, well, they are the reasons why that judgment is fair in the report.
Yeah, just one quick one on procurement, because I think this is a really important thing to realise, is that one of the outcomes, I think, of the task and finish that's coming out is quite a realisation that Ardal doesn't solve all of our problems when it comes to procurement, and it is extremely disorganised between different bodies within the organisation, different departments doing different things. And I think some reflection of perhaps even the task and finish group in of itself, of the review that's occurring there, and of the changes to legislation affecting us as an organisation, would be helpful. You know, I think when it comes to moderation process, you've been right in what you've picked to moderate. It's just what I'd like to see within the document is more of the reasoning behind that and reflection of what's gone wrong and how can we use that in the future. There's a little bit of, okay, what's our future challenges? But there's not a reflection of, because we did this wrong, we need to do this right the next time round. But that's all from me.
Councillor Prothero.
Thank you, Chair. I have a separate question, but I think seeing as I'm Chair of the Task and Finish group that's looking at reviewing our procurement strategies with a view to embed circular economy principles and social value outcomes, I also want to speak about, I was part of the self-assessment panel, and I can promise you, when it comes to how we procure here, I have quite strong views on how a decentralised procurement structure, it creates quite a lot of risk for us. And I raised that quite verbally, as Tom will say. We need to ensure buyers adhere to procurement regulations, but we also need to have controls that mean that we can see what we're spending, collect and manage our data better. And strategic procurement when it comes to having to find the massive savings and to make sure that we don't continue to try and buy things in the same way. We'll never hit net zero without strategic procurement. So I was quite verbal about that in these meetings, and definitely contributed to the fair score when it comes to procurement processes. It has no reflection on the financial side of how we manage risk in the authority. It was procurement, and that is something that we need to work on, definitely. But my question was really to do with the self-assessment and the complaints, because how we manage complaints and the level of complaints is a very visual thing for the council, and for members of the public, this is something that they see. I know this year we had 737 complaints, which is off the charts, and that we only managed to to just within the resolution targets hit, I think it was about 54%, and that's quite poor. So we realise that's poor. We've done something about it. We've said that there were opportunities for improvement and we identified them in the summer. So I just want to talk a little bit about what were those opportunities for improvement and how are we going to better manage that resolution of complaints going forward. Because as I said, it's a very visual thing. This is what the public see. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Prothero. Tom?
Thank you, Councillor Prothero. And in terms of the work around complaints, absolutely. There's been some work underway being led by the customer relations team since the summer. It's actually being reported to the strategic leadership team now in the next few weeks for a more detailed discussion across the directorates. We have been doing some specific work with our colleagues in environment and housing. As members of this committee know, you receive the annual complaints report in the winter of each year. That's the directorate because of the reasons that Councillor Prothero was talking about in terms of visibility, receive the highest proportion of complaints. A number of changes were introduced in the year that this assessment relates to. Some of the things that we've identified, Councillor Prothero, are kind of systemic. So they're about use of a system. They're about accountability and responsibility for administering that system in terms of responding to complaints. And then others are relating to specific service changes and actually understanding what does that tell us and how can we avoid complaints in the future when we make similar changes. But there's going to be some detailed information in your annual complaints report, which will come later on in the year.
Thank you, Tom. Councillor Hooper?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the report, Tom. And I just want to echo what Councillor Goodjohn said about, I think this is an improvement year on year. I think it's more balanced than last year, so I just want to commend the people who've been working on it for that case. Some very small points. The first thing I think, and this is probably for those people who may be listening in, just would you mind explaining the grades that would have been that people, so you've got good, fair. What are the other ones? Could it have been? Could it have been excellent? Could it have been poor? It'd be really interesting, because I think if someone's looking in on this, they're just hearing good as you can get. I don't know. The second point, and this is just a particular, I think there's a mistake on page 3 on the levelling up and shared prosperity funding that says there's £20 million of UK government funding over 10 years towards the regeneration of Barry Waterfront. I think that's the regeneration of Barry Town Centre. But this funding is also the funding that's currently on hold from UK government. So I just think we need to be really careful to make sure we put things in the self-assessment that are accurate. Perhaps you want to say something about the Making Waves project in there, again, like we did last year, that still hasn't happened, perhaps. I just want to ask a specific question as well, as this is a backward-looking document, and this you may be able to help me. The Oracle Fusion 3.7 million and overspend, is this in this year's review? And if it is, why isn't it articulated in this report at all? Because it's one of those things that made the press, so people were interested. And it's one of those things that if we're going to be, notwithstanding the point that I think this is an improvement, so I want that clear, but if we're going to be serious about looking at ourselves properly, we need to make sure that these things are clear and out there. And the last point, Tom, and I think we made this point last year, is that for this to be useful, it needs to be something that's accessible for people. So 116 pages for somebody else who might find useful, whether members of the public, members of staff, even councillors. Let's find a way of getting this into something that becomes really useful. The use of infographics, I brought up in the E&R scrutiny meeting the other day. I think that's good, but could we do more? And the last thing, and this was again, so this is a repetition of a point I made in E&R, is making sure that the language we use in that regard is really straightforward. It's not oblique, and oblique is a good word not to use in this context, I'd say. How do you make it accessible? Thanks, Tom. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks, Councillor Hooper.
Thank you, Councillor Hooper. And again, thank you for the comments that I'll pass on to the team. If I take those not slightly in the order that you answered them, but just in the way that I've scribbled them down, if I can. In terms of Oracle, yes, it partly within the year, because obviously it kind of straddled two. There are some references to Oracle within the report. There are two references to Oracle within the report, specifically relating to the lessons learned. But I take the point, and I think it's a good one that we would look to take away and put some additional information in there. I think that makes sense. In terms of the external funding, again, the production of this report has straddled the date of the general election. I do take the point in terms of the currency of the introduction. So what I'll do is make sure that we make it very clear in terms of those things, and I'll bring Matt in if I can do, because he'll have the very latest in terms of the distinction between levelling up and the shared prosperity, and the transforming towns funding. Absolutely, the point you made around the public summary, a public summary version of this is under production currently. We are looking at, we have rather looked at those kind of infographics and a much kind of easier way of presenting the information that's been performing, as I say, relatively well in terms of things like LinkedIn. It's not the easiest subject to talk with the public about. We have been at public events over the summer, having conversations in the round, trying to draw back to these conclusions. I think it is important, and I know I say this every year, this is a statutory report that needs to do a huge number of things. So bringing it here with all of this information, I think, is really important for elected members. But absolutely, I agree with you in terms of how we then summarise it, to communicate it to the public and make sure that they can participate in that consultation. And I think we're seeing better numbers. Well, we are seeing better numbers this year than we have done in the past. But it's something that we are committed to continue to try and improve. And yeah, if Matt, I know, is on the call, and if I'm not putting him too much on the spot, I know he'll be able to provide some information on the external funding.
Sorry, Matt.
Okay, to speak. Yeah, there's been occasional confusion between the two funds, as they're very similar amounts of money. The Towns Fund was awarded to us earlier in the year, a little bit unexpectedly, and that's £20 million. But we do know, since we've had the new government, that money is now on hold. We won't know any more about that until the Chancellor's budget on the 30th of October, but that's possibly at risk. The levelling up money, Barry making waves, we're still positive about that. The Council's signed the MOU, that's with UK government, and we're waiting to hear back from it this time.
That's Councillor Hooper.
Thank you, Chair. Just in terms of one of the points I was just asking, this is more of this is engagement for people who are watching today. So, Tom, do you mind so what are the criteria? Excellent, good, fair. What are the things? Would you mind? Thank you. And I only found one note of Fusion. I did a search on the document, so I'd love to know where the other one is.
Thank you. I know Councillor Goodjohn has answered the second question for you in the chamber, Councillor Hooper. I'm just going to try and find the criteria, and I'll come back to you if I can do. Yeah, there are 4, but I just want to make sure I'm quoting you the right ones.
Thanks, Tom. Are there any other questions? No, I've got a couple of questions. I'd just like to reiterate what Councillor Goodjohn, Councillor Hooper said. Vast improvement from last year, and we're moving forward. The only question, one of the questions I'd like to pose is, can this be simplified? Because it's a tremendous, I know it's a statutory document, Tom, but I don't think the statute actually sets out what you're required to do. It's 116 pages primarily of data, which, may be useful for Welsh Government or Audit Wales. But I should imagine most of it's not read. So we're performance indicator chasing or performance management chasing in regards to this documentation. So that's the first thing, is whether it can be simplified. And I know some authorities are looking at trying to simplify it moving forward. Second question is, again, the point I made in a previous report, we got percentages and no numbers. So we've got 40% of this compared with 15% last year, but 44% of what? So again, that gives me some concern. Same with consultation. Some of the social services, residents, 14 respondents, relatives, 10 respond out of how many? And I know you're at the end of this sausage machine, bringing this all together. But again, to give some balance to this and proportionality, is you actually need to know, how many people responded and out of how many. And I only use it because you're not in here anyway. I'll use it as a different. In regards to the police annual update, last year they said 1,394 people responded to their questionnaire, and they rated 88% as very good and 12% as good. So 100%, marvellous. When you consider South Wales Police has got 1.34 million people, 1,370 people corresponding with it actually isn't a very good response rate. It's something like 0.00001. And I think there needs to be a balance there in regards to that. So, that would be useful just to put some proportionality and balance in this document. I fully understand, the way, again, I think we raised it last year. I may have raised it last year. Yeah, what you're doing well, great. Everyone expounds what we do well as a council. We don't celebrate it enough sometimes, which we should do. And then obviously there are some areas for improvement in the report, which is picked up as sort of two sort of criteria. I think it would be useful in some respects to actually say what you've not delivered at all. So even though you set it out as one of the objectives within the within the delivery plan or whatever, rather than saying, oh well, these are issues to be addressed, to say actually we haven't delivered this, because there may be reasons which we're hiding. It could be because of finance, it could be out of staff and resources, and I think sometimes we hide those things because we don't want to show that we're failing, and I don't mean that unkind. And for me, it always comes back to the point is, how well do you know the self? How well does the council know itself? And it shouldn't be seen as a criticism. It actually should be seen as being open and transparent. And therefore, we haven't delivered this because of X, Y, and Z. And I think I raised it last year. Again, we're in a different position again this year. It's been improved. But I think on occasions there needs to be, as I said, some honesty, some openness and some transparency in some of this stuff. And again, tables of data, tables of percentages, tables of, what added value does that add to this council going forward and to the citizens you serve?
Thank you. No, not at all. Really, really good points. In terms of percentages without numbers, fair cop, and I'll ask the team to go through and make sure that is referenced, because as you say, it's important that it's 40% of how many. And I think the point around proportionality, the example you gave around social care homes is a good one. I think the overall message, I suppose, that we're trying to give from this report and this iteration is that we are trying to reflect more voices, more engagement than we have done previously. All of those exercises that were subject, as you say, to that challenge of how many people could have responded. Absolutely take the point around proportionality and balance. And I think the way that you pose that in terms of what hasn't been delivered I think that's an example of where we report our end of year performance as a separate report to all scrutiny committees. So that went in July. We've then, in effect, included a very high level summary of that within this report. What I've asked the team to do is look at whether we can simplify that process so that elected members receive one report. So you see the end of year performance as an intrinsic part of this report. The difficulty will be to try and do that and not make it even bigger, which then goes back to your very first point, Chair, in terms of can it be simplified? And I think the approach in the document absolutely probably can be. There's a huge range of things that we need to do in it. There is definitely something that we can do to simplify aspects, I think. I would say that as a leadership team, we have all read this. We've all been part of this process throughout over a number of months. And it isn't just a report and a document at the end of a process. It is more important the process itself in terms of what we've been contributing and what we've been drawing out of it and how we're then looking to take that forward. But I think it also goes back, your question to Councillor Hooper's in terms of how do we simplify and communicate it in a way that is then meaningful to residents and other partners, other colleagues, and that's something that that we'll certainly do some work on as well. And if you don't mind, Chair, I have got the judgment ratings that the Councillor Hooper asked about, and I can circulate this to members of the committee. We can look to make sure perhaps if there's an opportunity to include it in the pack to Cabinet. The ratings run from excellent, good, fair or poor across each of them. We've got a description of each of those ratings that gets applied. This is what we've used as part of that moderation piece. All directorate teams have got a copy of this as well in order that they can reach their judgments. But I'll get this circulated to elected members and members of the committee this evening.
Can I just pick that up? Shouldn't it be part of the document itself? So this is by which you're assessing yourselves, and therefore the criteria surely should be in the document somewhere which sets it out, because, you know, and again, if they're, when you say, obviously you've said there are criteria, so good means whatever it means, you know, same as Andrew's reports when he gives us limited and bits and pieces like that. Shouldn't it be in the report itself to actually say, this is the criteria we're using as a council, this is what it means? So actually, again, you can put some credence on what's being delivered.
I can certainly take that away. I think it was provided in the last year's reports, and there is actually a link within the report to a summary of the directorate judgment. So there is an opportunity, I think, for us to be able to do it at that stage. So yeah, let me take that away and have a look and make sure it's maybe reflected in the next iteration of the draft we bring back later on in the process.
I do get concerned about hyperlinks and things like that in documents, you know, unless you're reading it electronically and press on it, you know, you go in, but, you know, but if that's the grading you use or whatever, then it should be a fundamental part of the document. You know, that's all I'm paying. You know, again, I take on board, Tom, I wouldn't want you to try and rewrite this whole thing, because again, we'll be here till next year doing it. But I think there is some issues that really need to be picked up, and I'm sure they'll be referred back to Cabinet, and Cabinet can tell us whether they wish to accept them or not in due course.
Just picking up on your point, Chair, I think this committee should recommend that is added into it, because then that, as Tom has given us the power to request Cabinet, the legislation has given us the power to request of Cabinet. It'd be good to know why it wouldn't be there. And I think it's very simple. It also makes it straightforward, and you don't get questions like I asked being asked.
Yeah, obviously, I'm sure Gareth will pick it up in the minutes that these comments that have been made will be put in Cabinet, and Cabinet can respond back to us as to whether or not they're happy to accept it, and a direction is to simplify it next year would be very good for the officers, I'm sure, but we wait and see. Councillor Good, John.
Yeah, can I make clear what I'm looking for then? I mean, I would hope this year what I'm looking for is a list of corporately recognised failures and the lessons learned. Not every lesson learned, I'm begging you, just some of the lessons learned on how we're going to improve for next year. That includes Oracle, that includes Eagleswell and Colcott Sports Centre and all of these engagement things that has, you don't have to include the entire project as a failure. You can go, okay, the public engagement on Colcott Sports Centre, Cadoxton House was not good enough. Here's how we can improve. Oracle, procurement, there's all these things that you can include as, you don't have to call it failures. I know you don't like calling something a failure, but we want, I want a list of what's went wrong along with what's went well. And for next year, so you don't rewrite the entire document, what I think is that at least us as members and the performance team, we've already seen all of the performance indicators so many times, 4 times every year. Hopefully we read the whole thing every single time and repeat them every single time. What I'm looking for is, of the actions, what went particularly well, and to celebrate what went particularly well about them. Because if you include every single action, every single thing that we've done, nothing's being particularly highlighted, and every single number, you highlight the things that have gone really well. The support given to businesses, the youth service has gone extremely well with the inspection that's happened recently. Pick out these few things that you're particularly proud of from each department. And what I want is the absolute best and the absolute worst and an overall judgment of how we've done. That's what we're looking for, really. You don't need literally 90 pages of performance indicators we've already seen. But again, that's my, I would hope would be recommendation. One is a list of failures, and second is you don't need all of the performance indicators as part of this document.
Thank you, Councillor Goodjohn. Completely accept the point that elected members will have seen lots of the performance-related information during the year. I think there is a balance to be struck that the first performance requirement that this document is covering is the delivery of the council's annual delivery plan, and what we do need to make sure is that, as several members have said this evening, there's balance across that. I think, as I say, there is a way of doing that by bringing end-of-year performance in this report together and looking at how we summarise that and how we provide the background to elected members and the public if you want to go and see all of the detail. But actually, we look more at a kind of maybe an exceptions basis, and that would pick up on the point of things that have not gone as well or not gone as planned, and would allow elected members to see the balance across the two of those. So. And I have just checked, there is a reference within the report. There should be a link to that that rating criteria. It clearly isn't, because it wasn't working when I was clicking on it, and the members can't see it. I'll make sure it's reinstated, but I will obviously note that the committee will make that as a comment to Cabinet as well.
I don't think it ought to be a link. I think it ought to be said specifically. There needs to be a paragraph on it. I think, just finally, I think this issue around, this is a process. It's okay to carry out a process, but what actually added value and outcomes do you deliver as a result of this? And, I know the legislation say you have to do it, but, if it goes to Welsh Government, which I assume it does, what do they do with it? They're going to get 22 of these, presumably, from each local authority, and they're going to compare apples with apples, apples with pears, grapes or whatever it may be. And I think that's the reality. And I think it does, in my view, it just needs someone to sit down and actually say, do we actually need all this data? Do we need all this detail? And what are the key things for this authority? Picking up sort of Councillor Goodjohn's point. All I would try and do is make it easier for the officers and the council, rather than spending hours on end and vast sums of money delivering a report which goes nowhere, and actually you already know what you do good and what you don't do well, you know, to improve those service delivery aspects given the current financial climate.
Thank you, Chair. And I think the point around how can we simplify this is a really well-made one. It's one that we're reflecting on currently. I'm going to be meeting with chairs and vice chairs and group leaders and yourself in the coming weeks to talk about the performance framework associated with the new corporate plan. But I don't want you to have the impression that this is just a compliance exercise by any means that results in a report that just goes to Welsh Government and we never use again. This is an intrinsic part of the way that this authority looks and learns. This year is particularly important with the development of that new corporate strategy for 25 to 2030, and it feeds the annual planning cycle in terms of identifying what we do need to prioritise and what we don't. So whilst we do send it to Audit Welsh Government, we hope that, that those organisations read it to the same extent that we do. It's a really important piece of work for us as well.
I understand that, Tom, but what I don't want to do is feed the beast here, you know, and it's important that we do get balance and proportionality, so which you've already picked up. Okay, are there any other comments? No? Okay. I think the recommendation then is that we note the contents of the draft Fair Little Morgan Annual Self-Assessment Report 23-24 and refer the comments made at committee to Cabinet for their deliberations and the requirement to respond back to us in due course. Are you happy with that? Councillor John, just
For everyone, we're asking whether just comments to Cabinet will force a reply as to why they would reject those comments, as opposed to recommendations where they're statutorily obliged to do so.
I'll change it. Yeah, we make these recommendations to Cabinet for consideration, and that they either adopt or give us the reasons why they won't adopt them at the next committee, presumably.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the guidance is really straightforward on that point. And it says that the Council must make a draft of its self-assessment report available to its Governance and Audit Committee, which is what you're seeing this evening. Committee must review the draft report and may make recommendations for changes to the conclusions or actions that the Council intends to take. And that would be by your comments to Cabinet. And then if the Council doesn't make a change recommended by the Governance and Audit Committee, it must set out in the final self-assessment report the recommendation and the reasons why it didn't make that change. And that's the purpose of bringing it back later on in the process prior to Council.
Yeah, thanks for that clarity, Tom. So it's recommendations from us to Cabinet for consideration. Yeah, and then they can report back one way or the other. Okay. And I'm sure Gareth will do me a very nice recommendation when he writes this all up. So, someone prepared to move, please? Thank you, Councillor John. Can I have a seconder? Councillor Hooper. Anyone against? Oh, thank you, Councillor Wood as well. Anyone against? No, thank you. Item 6 of the agenda, Q1 Treasury Management Monitoring 24-25. Again, a referral from Cabinet to us. Matt? Are you there, Matt?
Hi, Matt. Hello, Matt Bowman, are you there, please? Okay, shit. He's coming on to me now, I believe.
I've just lost my link from the documents. Can we come back to this item so I can get the papers back in front of me? Sorry.
Yep, no problem. We'll just defer that to the end of the meeting. So item 7 then is progress against the internal audit risk-based plan. Andrew?
Thank you, Chair. Andrew Wathen, Head of the Regional Internal Audit Service. This is one of the regular reports we bring into Governance and Audit Committee based on the progress of our work against the plan which this committee agreed back in June. So hopefully members will be familiar with the format. It's in relation to the Q1, more or less, and just to preempt any questions, this is as at the 31st of July, not quite the financial quarter, but I felt it was more appropriate to give you more up-to-date information than the end of June. We've set ourselves targets for the financial quarters, which are outlined in paragraph 2.2. But the Appendix A shows all the jobs which have been included in the audit plan, the approved audit plan for 24-25, including opinion and non-opinion audit work which we intend undertaking. So this is a progress report on how well we're doing against that. As you can see, we set ourselves a target of 10% for Q1, and we've achieved 18% as at the 31st of July, and are on track to achieve the Q2 target of 30%. We've issued 9 reports to draft report stage or final, and with 12 audits being in progress as at the end of July. Of those 9 reports issued, 8 were opinion related. That's set out in table 2 on paragraph 2.4, with very positive opinions to start the year with, 2 substantial, 5 reasonable and 1 limited. I'll come on to the limited opinion in just a sec, if I could. With regards to limited assurance opinions, we've got a process in place within the team that we will go back and do an actual follow-up review, follow-up audit within 6 to 12 months of that final report being issued to verify that the agreed management actions and recommendations have actually been implemented. What I would suggest then, Chair, is if that follow-up audit resulted in a second limited assurance opinion, then obviously I would bring that to your attention within Audit Committee and recommend that you would call in the respective head of service or director to provide you with the necessary assurances that they would make improvements moving forward. And Joan and I are in discussions at the moment in terms of how we can improve that process moving forward. As set out in 2.6, those are the opinions we use, the 4 opinions we use, with a definition in terms of the level of assurance we provide on individual audits, which, as you know, then feed into my annual opinion in my annual report. With regards to the limited opinion up to the 31st of July, that relates to the tender and evaluation award follow-up, and in particular, building services, one team within building services, project and planned team services. Members will note that in Appendix A, that is actually one job that we did a follow-up on, but one area of building services had improved significantly, development and investment team, and unfortunately, the project and planned team services hadn't improved as much as we would have hoped. Therefore, I felt it was fairer to split the opinion, even though it was one report, and therefore we've reported 2 opinions into committee this evening, and I'm recommending that we call in the head of service for project and planned team services element of that work that we undertook. With regards to 23-24 audits which weren't completed to either draft or final as at the end of the year, we've also listed those and separated those out for information for members. There were 14 reports in that category. As at the end of July, we've taken 21% to final or draft report stage, with another 50% in progress as at the end of July. So that is work in progress moving forward. Of the reports we've issued in 24-25 so far, we've issued 21 recommendations, with 8 medium priority and 13 low priority, and those are set out in the appendix as well, and they'll be included in a report which follows this evening. In terms of the appendices, Chair, the Appendix A, as mentioned already, is a list of all jobs within the audit plan 24-25 and the specific progress being made to the 31st of July. Appendix B is an update to the 23-24 jobs carried forward, which were either in progress or not started, and therefore we've included them in the 24-25 plan. Happy to take any questions, Chair.
Yeah, thank you for that, Andrew. I think certainly normal procedure on committee is that if we have two limited reports, then we will be calling in the head of service in regards to building services, project and plan team services. However, as is normal, I think we just need the background report before they come in, so we understand exactly what the issues were when you did that audit. So a little covering report saying what the issues were. I'm sure Nigel would pick that up because he normally does. And I'm sure Councillor Prothero will take a keen interest in the procurement code of practice and the contract procedure rules. So obviously she'll need to know what the background of this is as well, given we've got a sort of a resident expert really to deal with that. So obviously when the recommendations will be that we call them in, but that's subject to committee making that decision. Questions, Councillor Prothero?
You've more or less answered it for me, Chair. I wanted to know what exactly were the issues with the tender evaluations and the ward processes that you've looked at to make you feel that a limited assurance was all you could give them. But as Chair has said, we will accept some background information in a report, and obviously we'll need to have a little bit of time to digest that. But if you can give me a quick, because I'm really interested to know, a quick summary of exactly what was wrong, that would be really great. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Prothero. Andrew?
Thank you, Councillor. Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I mean, the key issues we've noted in 2.7, we've summarised them, but we can bring more detail back to committee in due course.
I don't know whether that answered Councillor Prothero's questions, what the sort of key issues.
Yeah, we haven't got that report with us at this evening, Chair. We put that as an overview in terms of an over summary, and the details we'll have to provide at a later date.
Councillor Prothero, you'll have to wait till the report comes before us at the next committee in October, I think. So obviously we'll get that before, what was it, 3 clear days before committee, or certainly before the weekend anyway, and people can digest that. Before, Councillor Nigel.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just I agree with that. I think just for future reports, just preempting that having the recommendation findings and the recommendation in the report, the covering report, would be really useful, because I think that would cover off a lot of questions. And I wholeheartedly endorse inviting the lead for that area to come along and talk through that report, because I am keen on what the barriers are to them being able to do that. But enough of the comments that I snuck in against the agenda. In terms of a question, we talked in the last... sorry, I should say as well, thank you, Andrew, because I think the report's really clear, and I like the way you split that opinion as well, because that does clarify where the issues are, which is really important, and give somebody else a good result, which is fair, given the fact that one area had addressed the recommendations. So thank you for that. Yeah, just one question. The prioritisation of audits we talked about previously, I know they're all high priority, and how we prioritise within the highs. And I just wondered if that was possible to add that into Appendix A for future meetings, just so we've got some idea of which ones, again, may be dropped, maybe not, because I know they're not all planned to be undertaken in the year due to resources. So just wondered where we're at with that, please.
Thank you, Nigel. Andrew?
Thank you for your comments and questions. Yeah, we've talked about the prioritisation previously. It's a difficult one to judge in terms of our workload. There's a lot of logistics that need to go into that. In terms of our resources available, getting the right person to do a particular job with the right level of skills and experience. We need the availability of the service manager. It's time in terms of the timing of the year as well, with certain services which we've included in the plan. We could argue that everything in the plan is a high priority, but we've got to we assess things on a quarterly basis. We review things on a quarterly basis. I can't say hand on heart that we've got a recognised process for prioritising the work. It's something we consider behind the scenes with discussions with myself, with Joan, the two assistant audit managers we've got on board, with the service managers, with directors. Sometimes directors influence the timing of some of the reports, either postponing or bringing forward. It works both ways. So it's something that we've thought about, we've talked about, but we don't think it's going to add much value incorporating it into the data we provide to the committee at this moment, Chair.
Thank you, Andrew. Nigel, is it a legacy hand, or did you want to come back?
If I can come back quickly, then if I can flip it round, rather than prioritising, I'm just conscious we're now nearly in October, and the bit, I think, speaking on behalf of the committee, and please someone let me know if I'm talking out of turn, but I think the bit we're really concerned about is which audits will be not undertaken and postponed to a future year. So I guess rather than saying, can we have them prioritised, just please bear in mind that there's not that long until the end of the year. So please, can we be made aware of which audits may be postponed as soon as possible, if that's easier? I appreciate that may not be possible right now, but as soon as that is possible and well before the end of the year, please.
Thank you, Nigel. Andrew?
Yeah, thanks again. I understand and acknowledge that question. That's something we'll certainly look to provide. Q1, it's early doors, and we're just kind of getting our feet under the table. I appreciate we're in October, but we're bringing these reports to you on a regular basis. As I said, we review on a quarterly basis the allocation of work, so we would be in a better position come January to provide you with that information, but we'll certainly consider doing that in future reports, Chair.
Thank you, Andrew. Councillor Goodjohn?
Yeah, just following on from the question from Councillor Prothero, my question is, can the Task and Finish Group, the Corporate Performance Task and Finish Group, receive the audit report on corporate governance as a matter of urgency? Because I know we're getting close to wrapping up our proceedings, and it could be quite useful for final recommendations. So if you could liaise with Democratic Services and just give us the report as soon as reasonably possible, that could be helpful. It might not end up being helpful, but I think it is useful considering it's a task and finish on procurement.
Andrew?
Thank you, Councillor. Can you just clarify which report you're talking about? You said governance and procurement?
Sorry, the audit report on corporate on corporate procurement.
Right.
Yes. Thank you. Sorry.
I wouldn't have thought there's any issue there, Andrew, because given you've raised the issues, the compliance with the council's procurement code of practice and contract procedure rules, if there is a task and finish group, then obviously that would assist the task and finish group as identifying areas where departments or teams are not complying.
We'll certainly look to do that, Chair.
Councillor Hooper?
Thanks, Chair. Just looking through the audits to come, and I noticed hybrid council meetings is down as one. Given that the council has recently changed to being remote only for scrutiny meetings, I think that should be something that make sure it's reflected in the process for building the audit. And a request really that elected members are engaged in this process, particularly in their view of the governance, potential governance failings of meetings that are all remote. And I'd like to share with you a letter that I sent to the Environment and Regeneration Scrutiny Chair the other day, copied into the CEO and leader, which referenced some failings that I was picking up from the last scrutiny meeting. So I think it's something that there's a number of members will find this a concern, and if there's a £10,000 saving from it, I'm concerned that that's being over-egged for I would imagine that the governance failings could be even higher. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. If you'd like to share that letter with me, then that would be fine.
Yeah, I wouldn't mind being contacted, Andrew, as part of the process if that is possible. But obviously, I've got to be very careful about my conflict of interest in regards to this issue.
Yes, certainly, Chair, and we'll certainly build that into the scope of the job when we allocate the work out.
Are there any other questions? No? Any comments? No? Okay, if we go to the recommendations then, I think the recommendation is that we note the content of the report and progress made against the internal audit risk-based plan 24-25, given that we've only got 1 quarter at the moment, and that the head of service who covers building services, project and planned team services be called into the October meeting of Governance and Audit Committee. Someone prepared to move, please? Thank you, Councillor Good. John, can I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Hooper. Anyone against? No, thank you very much. Item 8 then is the recommendation monitoring. Is that Joan?
Yeah. Thank you, Chair. Good evening. I'm Joan Davis. The purpose of this report is to provide members of the committee with a position statement on the internal audit recommendations made, implemented and outstanding as of the 31st of July 2024. Appendix A provides the detail of the high and medium priority recommendations. As members are aware, recommendations are made at the conclusion of an audit review if it is felt that improvements should be made to mitigate risk and strengthen controls. The implementation of these are monitored to ensure the identified risk has been addressed. So Table 2 within the report summarises the recommendation status in respect of the audits completed from the 24-25 audit plan. It illustrates that a total of 8 recommendations have been made as of the 31st of July and all have a future target date. Table 3 shows the recommendation status of audits completed prior to this financial year, where recommendations are yet to be implemented. There are no overdue recommendations. However, there are 5 recommendations that were made during 22-23 audits that still have a future planned implementation date. Hence, as I've said, the identified risk will still exist. Appendix B provides details of these, including the current position and the date when these recommendations are due to be completed. The monitoring of recommendations is undertaken regularly by the audit team, and any undue delays or issues are highlighted to senior management via our escalation process, and ultimately they're reported to this committee. So I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Any questions, anyone? Councillor Hooper?
I'm just really pleased to see 2.4. It is pleasing to note there are actually currently no overdue recommendations. Brilliant. Well done.
Any other questions for anyone? Any comments? The only comment I would make is, whilst there's no overdue recommendations, a lot of these things have been pushed backwards. So the NFI residence parking permits, agreed date was July 23, and we've now got a revised date of the 31st of December 24, which is contained in Appendix B. I think the only point I would like to raise is that the heads of service or the directors need to be advised that if they don't meet those dates now, then they're likely to be called in, because again, July 23, we're, almost, 17, 18 months, certainly in regards to the parking permits. And the similar one, we got attendance and sickness recording, final report May 23, and then we've got a revised date, which has been revised a couple of times, of a year, to the 31st of March 25. That's 2 years nearly after the report came out. So we just cannot continue. I know obviously there's an Oracle issue there, but we can't let this continue to, drift on and on and on. So, Joan, I know whether you can write to the directors or the heads of service in regards to these issues and say, you've got an agreed date now of whatever it is, 31st December, 31st of March, and we will expect that is dealt with by that date.
Thank you, Chair. Just to let you know as well, we do attend the strategic leadership team regularly, and this appendix is provided to the group then. So I think the relevant chief officers are aware, but we'll make sure that message gets through. Thank you.
I'm sure Tom will emphasise it now to say enough's enough. You know, certainly where there's nearly 2 years out of date, that ain't good enough, is it really? I don't mean being, to put it off for a year, I find is quite. I know there are issues about Oracle, and I can understand that, but slipping is no excuse really. Are there any other questions? Any comments? No, okay, we got the recommendation. I think the recommendation is to note the position statement on the internal audit recommendations made, implemented, outstanding at the 31st July 24, and consider information provided. So we've noted that. So someone prepared to move, please. Thank you, Councillor Hooper. Second, Councillor Goodjohn. Anyone against? No, thank you. Item 9 then, Governance and Audit Committee Self-Assessment and Knowledge Skills. Joan?
Yeah. Thank you, Chair. So a self-assessment questionnaire based on the SITFA checklist was circulated to members of this committee to assess the existing skills, knowledge and areas of expertise of members and to identify any gaps or training requirements. 5 out of 9 questionnaires were returned. The self-assessment questionnaire is attached to Appendix A and shows the 10 statements that were considered. Appendix B then summarises the responses across the 10 statements as well as the additional comments received. The results indicate that Governance and Audit Committee members have an overall sound base of knowledge and experience in the areas of responsibility for this committee. The questionnaire also asked members to indicate what knowledge and skills they had which would add value to the work of this committee. The responses are illustrated in Table 1 within the report and shows there is experience and knowledge at various levels across key areas. All of the information will be used to inform a training programme. It is proposed the following areas form a basis of the programme, noting that this is a live document and will be subject to review by committee on an ongoing basis. So the areas identified are financial management and accounting, risk management, Governance and Audit Committee role and functions, and counter fraud. So subject to your consideration today, it's proposed that we will draft a learning and development plan and arrange the appropriate training. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. Any questions, anyone? Councillor Goodjohn?
Yeah, this is an important piece of work, more important than people would normally think. The one thing that I didn't think was covered in here was probably something that's more broad for members of the council, but particularly considering we have lay members here as well that don't get incorporated into that process, is confidence within the committee, confidence to speak and to contribute. Something that I know that there are still members that don't contribute anywhere near as much as other members of the committee, and a lot of that can be down to confidence. So I wonder if there is any kind of work that can be done in order to not only improve knowledge but also confidence when speaking on items in this committee.
Okay, you address that, Joe. Thank you. Nigel?
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, 2 questions from me. One regarding the self-assessment. It looks like there were only 5 respondents. Can someone just update me on how many people we were expecting to respond to that, whether that's everyone or whether we're expecting more responses, and whether that would better feed a training programme if we did? And 4.4.1 of the report says summary reports of finalised audit assignments were reported to the Governance and Audit Committee during the year. I'm not totally confident with that. I'm trying to work out whether that's saying that we received summary reports of each audit assignment, because we don't. So I'm not particularly comfortable with that. To my knowledge, the only ones we get in summary form are where it's limited assurance, and even that was a relatively recent addition. So it might just be my understanding perspective. So if someone could clarify that for me, that'd be great, please.
Okay, if I answer the first part, we sent the questionnaires out to all Governance and Audit Committee members, so that was 9, and we had 5 back. Thank you.
Chair, if I could come in. Yeah, we sent the questionnaire out and we sent some reminders out as well. but those are the responses we got back, and they're only sent out to members of this committee. In terms of the second part of your question, Nigel, I can't see where that is exactly in our report, but I take on board your point and we'll reflect on it and we'll make sure that there's up-to-date information provided next time round. You do only get a summary of the limited reports, you're quite right, but we're looking to review that and maybe add additional information into future reports as we progress throughout the year.
Okay, are there any other questions? Nigel, are you happy with that?
Yeah, well, I'm not sure I'm happy with it being changed in future because this is our self-assessment. So I think it needs to be changed for this report, and it's in 4.4.1, just so, because Andrew said he wasn't sure where it was, so that's where it is.
I think you've jumped the report.
Apologies. Chair, there's no 4.4.1 in this report.
No, I know. It's the next item I think you're referring to, which is the self-assessment.
Apologies, that may be why we're all getting, or I'm certainly getting confused. Apologies then. Can you take that forward for the next one and I'll take that back. Apologies, Chair, and apologies, Andrew.
No worries. That's okay. Are there any other questions? Any comments? No, okay. So the recommendations are that we've reviewed the self-assessment questionnaire feedback information and discuss and confirm the lead in development areas required. And I think, Joan, you're going to produce a training plan for us, which hopefully we can bring on board and do some training sessions. Obviously, picking up the additional area that Councillor Goodjohn raises, which is not only for this committee, I think it's for all committees and council in some respects, about people contributing to the discussion and the debate, but asking the right questions. And we await that training programme. Someone prepared to move, please? Thank you. Councillor Goodjohn, seconded. Councillor Hooper. Anyone against? No, thank you. The next one is the Draft Governance and Audit Committee Annual Report 23-24. Nigel, just wait till Andrew does it and then you can jump in.
Thank you, Chair. I look forward to that question when it comes. So this is the Governance and Audit Committee Annual Report, Chair, so for 23-24. So this is the second time this report's come to committee. It's your annual report, and I've pulled it together on behalf of the chair and members of the Governance and Audit Committee. So this is the first draft, and I certainly welcome any comments from members before we finalise it and send it through to council for approval. So what I've tried to do is make sure that you are as a committee complying with the legislations, i.e. the Local Government Measure and the Local Government and Elections Wales Act. You are complying with your terms of reference as set out in the Constitution, and that you have exercised your role effectively throughout the year in terms of challenge and accepting reports of a variety of areas from a variety of officers. So in terms of compliance with the Local Government Elections Act Wales, you do comply with that. As members will know, we've got a lay chairperson, and we have lay members on board, and we have 6 elected councillors, and the proportions are in accordance with the recommendations. In terms of your key responsibilities in terms of reference, they are to review the financial statements, to review and be satisfied with the Council's annual governance statement, to monitor the effectiveness of the internal control function, and to support internal audit in terms of its duties, delivering a service across the organisation to all services, to consider the effectiveness of risk management arrangements, to review and receive recommendations and reports from external audit and Audit Wales, support the ongoing development of the effectiveness of the committee itself, to make sure we're compliant with the relevant legislation, and also to oversee the Council's performance assessment and arrangements for handling complaints. Obviously, the self-assessment report has been quite comprehensively presented to you already this evening. So during the year, members have demonstrated they were keen to challenge the reports presented to them, the robustness of information and process, and made suggestions to improve governance reporting moving forward. They're also keen to ensure officers learned lessons from issues identified and held senior management accountable for making the required improvements. Jones talked about the self-assessment checklist in terms of identifying your skills and knowledge and expertise, which contributes to the delivery and the delivery of the committee. Jones already covered that in terms of it's more meaningful to come from committee members of how we can formulate a training program as opposed to us just putting a training program together. So, Chair, the detailed report then just gives some examples of what reports have been presented to committee, what challenges you've made to committee, and what responses you've received from various officers in terms of moving that forward. Also, I've had some comments from the chair already, because he saw an early draft of this, and we'll incorporate those comments in the next version of the report, Chair, along with any other comments from members. So, in conclusion, I felt on behalf of your behalf, you've reviewed and challenged a range of topics, including the work of internal audit, external audit, and requirements set out in the Local Government Elections Act. You've demonstrated that you've held senior management to account for making improvements in the governance arrangements and control environment, challenged officers and sought clarification and progress reports to obtain the assurances required to support good continued governance. You've met your terms of reference, and the self-assessment comments come back have confirmed that members feel they have a good level of knowledge and experience to influence the committee in its undertakings. Appendix 1 sets out your terms of reference as per the Constitution. Appendix 2 lists all the reports that have come forward to committee. And Appendix 3 picks up the information that was in the previous report on the self-assessment and the summary in terms of the feedback we've had, along with the comments received. So on that basis, Chair, happy to take any comments and queries from members. And if I could formally have any comments back in writing within 2 weeks, then I can facilitate getting an updated version for your next committee meeting. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you for that, Andrew. Are there any questions? Nigel?
How did you know, Chair? I didn't even put my hand up. Thanks, Andrew, for putting the report together. I understand the Chair's given you some comments, so obviously without knowing what they are, I hope I don't duplicate. But there's only two questions from me, really. One is 4.4.1, summary of reports for finalised audit assignments. I think that just does need correcting to make it clear that we haven't actually seen all the reports, only those limited assurance ones. So yeah, if you can just look at that, please, and just make sure that's accurate. And the other one is just for my understanding, and I'm probably, sorry, my memory's awful, going to ask this every year. 4.4.2, based on the internal audit reviews completed during 2022-23. Can you just remind me why that, because that feels like it's a year behind to me, and that we would be normally reporting on the 23-24 audits, given that we're now in 24-25. So apologies, I'm sure it's my understanding, but if that could be clarified, that'd be great, please.
Thank you. Yes, 4.4.1 will certainly update that paragraph. 4.4.2, this was information received by committee during 23-24, which was my annual opinion report, which you received in June 23, which related to 22-23. So apologies for the confusion, but it was actually the report that you received in that year. At that point, during the year 23-24, you hadn't received my annual report because that would have come in June 24. But we'll look to that paragraph to see if we can simplify it in some way.
Thank you, Andrew. Any other questions? Any comments, anyone? No, the only comments I made to Andrew was maybe in appendices indicating the call-ins that we undertaken, and not all of them, but certainly some, just to give an indication of why we called it in, what service improvements were made, and, you know, what would the outcome of it, basically, so that it gives some balance to it. That's what I said. If there are any other comments, if you can let Andrew know, that would be great. So if there are no other comments, then obviously I think we note the contents of the report, and that any comments in regards to any issues that need to be raised within the draft document be submitted to you within the next 14 days. Someone move? Seconded. Moved by Councillor Goodjohn, seconded by Nigel. I use Nigel this time. Anyone against? Nope, thank you. Next item is the forward work programme. Joan?
Thank you, Chair. Okay, so agenda item 11 is the forward work programme for 24-25. As you all know, this enables the committee to ensure it's covering its range of responsibilities as per the terms of reference. So Appendix A has been updated, and the proposed agenda is within the contents of the report. So the next meeting is the 21st of October, but members are asked to note that it's possible that the 21st of October will be a little early for the audited statement of accounts to be presented for approval by this committee, and an additional meeting may be required, but we'll know closer to the time. Thank you.
Thank you, Joan. Councillor Hooper?
Yeah, I don't know whether you remember, Joan, at the last meeting, I didn't ask why we're not taking any reports from Cardiff City region because their accounts still haven't come here. I note that I've been asked what specific areas am I looking at. I'd like to see all the accounts. I'd like them to come here. I'd like them to receive some democratic scrutiny.
Yeah, okay. Thanks, yeah, that's noted. Thank you.
Okay, the only other, obviously the item that needs to be added on to this is the call-in. So that needs to be added. And again, as you said, Joan, I think the issue around the statement of accounts is that Audit Wales are obviously, I can't say struggling, but they have some capacity issues. And I understand that that may not come to the council until sort of mid-November, and therefore we'll just need a special committee just to deal with one item. So obviously I'm sure Gareth will fit it in as and when appropriate before the council meeting, which I think has got to sign you off. So subject to that, we note the forward work programme, and obviously with the addition of the call-in. So someone move, please. Thank you. Good gone. Second, Councillor Hooper. Anyone against? No, there's no one against. Right. If we go back to item 6 then now, which is the Q1 Treasury Management Monitoring Report. Hopefully you're with us, Matt.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks very much for bearing with me earlier on this evening as well. So this is a fairly comprehensive report, but there aren't any major issues and no concerns for us. So I'm just going to give it a brief intro and take you through some highlights rather than issues and concerns. So we had a code of practice from SIPA back in December 21. That put some duties on me to monitor our treasury activity on a regular quarterly basis and also report to Cabinet quarterly. That's what we did earlier this month, and our practice is then to forward that to this committee for review as well. I'm just going to pick up 3 areas: the prudential and treasury indicators, a couple of words on borrowing, and then a couple of words on our investments as well. So the report in terms of our prudential and treasury indicators, that will details any changes in the capital programme since it was last reported to Cabinet, and it therefore updates the Treasury strategy from earlier in the year to reflect those changes. All the changes are well be within the limits set in the Treasury management and investment strategy, so no concerns there. On borrowing, the council's continuing its previous practice of self-financing new capital expenditure and maturing debt wherever possible. However, as colleagues are aware, council's finances, as are every council in Wales and council in the UK, is under pressure. So we have seen some reduction in our balances and reserves over the last year. So we will start to see the council borrowing externally, and that typically, probably exclusively, will be through the Public Works Loan Board, the PWLB. Interest rates are currently higher than they were historically. They've stayed at their high rates for quite a while. So where we do need to borrow at the moment, we'll borrow relatively short term, and that's in the anticipation that rates fall during the period. We've seen early in the summer the Bank of England base rate go down a touch. Still anticipated that'll come down a little bit further early in the year. Obviously, last week it was held at its current rate, and that's because inflation hasn't steadied quite as much as the Monetary Policy Committee would like. But earlier this last week as well, we did see the Federal Reserve in the USA, those interest rates coming back. So some prospect of interest rate reductions later in the year. The only borrowing we have undertaken this current year is £5 million to fund housing revenue account activity. And I guess the good news on that is we do have a project rate from the PWLB for borrowing for the HRA, and that's 60 basis points below the standard rate. So the standard rate for PWLB is 100 basis points or 1% above gilts. So for the HRA, it's just 40 basis points over gilts. As at the end of the first quarter, our total external borrowing was £148 million. That's up marginally from 143 at the 31st of March. So some new borrowing and also some repayment taking place within that time. Again, as my opening remarks, that's well within our authorised limit and operational boundary indicators set for the year. And our borrowing costs at the end of the first quarter are now at 4.84%. A couple of words on the investments. It's relatively stable too. In the first quarter of the year, the investment portfolio just increased marginally from a touch over £34 million to 36, and those are the numbers at 30th of June. Average rate of return, we have seen that creeping up, so that's 5.31% at the first quarter. And that's probably all I need to say as introduction to the report. So happy to take any questions, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. Councillor Goodjohn?
Yeah, just a quick one, Matt. It does touch a little bit on internal borrowing. I'm just interested, as it's stated that the internal borrowing has had to reduce because of, well, we need to maintain a certain number of investments for liquidities purposes. So if you could give me at some point by email the amount of internal borrowing it's reduced by over the first quarter would be really interesting. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm quite happy to do that. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Just a quick question for me, because I don't understand it, Matt. And I'm sure no other, well, maybe other people understand it, but I certainly don't. I don't understand what the project rate is, given it was 60 basis point below the standard rate. What does that actually mean in percentage terms, in simplistic terms? Because I know you mentioned gilts and all other things. But actually confused me more than anything. So in easy speak, what does it mean?
Yeah. So if the gilt rate on a given day was 4%, if we were borrowing for general capital programme activity, the rate we'd be charged by the PWLB would be 4% plus 100 basis points or 1%. So we borrow at 5%. There's the concession when we borrow for the HRA. So it's just in those circumstances, be the 4% plus 40 basis points, i.e. 0.4%. So you would borrow at 4.4% for the HRA.
Thank you for that. That makes it a lot simpler for me to understand. So thank you very much for that. Are there any other questions? Any comments? No, the recommendation is then we note the contents of the report. Someone move, please. Thank you, Councillor Goodjohn, seconded by Councillor Hooper. Anyone against? Nope. Okay, item then 12 is any other item which the chair has decided urgent. And I don't want to prolong the meeting, but there are two things I think we just need to address at some stage. Stanwell School came to us about 12 months ago. And we've not had a final report. And clearly I understand lots of work was done on it. It's come back within local authority control, etc. So I'm just picking up whether we could have a report on that to the next committee, if that's okay. Okay. The other thing is, which again raises a similar issue. As a committee, we don't have an action log. So we make all these decisions and actually there's no log as to actually what should come back to us, where and when, and whether we've dealt with it. And again, I don't mind more work for Gareth or anyone else like that, but it will mean some work for him, is actually what do we still need to deal with? Because again, one of the issues in Audit Wales report, which I know we've asked for to come back to us, is the planning process and protocol. Now, I don't know whether that's gone through the system, but I haven't seen it come back here, and we did ask for it to come back here. So I think for me, you know, working as we do quite regularly on these matters and making decisions on these issues is actually what should come back to us. And if they're not back to us, where's the action log to say, actually, these have been dealt with and these haven't? So I'm just wondering whether there could be a process as to how we could address that.
We do have a recommendation tracking system for scrutiny, so we can replicate that for governors and auditors.
Lovely.
That's what members want. It's just, do you want to start it through the year, or would you rather start?
Well, I think someone just needs to tell me what's outstanding, and because I'm sure most of the members, we make so many decisions here and recommendations, you know, so I'm just wondering whether you could have a quick swish through and say, look, this is outstanding, Chair, and then sort of we'll pick them up as we then go forward.
That's fine.
Is that okay?
Yeah.
I apologise for raising it, but, you know, things lag, don't they? And all of a sudden, I just get concerned that we've raised issues and we don't get reports back on it. So if that's okay. Then we got part two, any exclusions, there aren't any, so there's no other items. Can I just thank everyone for attending the meeting in person as well as online. And thank everyone for their contribution tonight. Thank the officers for their input into dealing with this matter and look forward to seeing you at the next meeting in October. So thank you very much, everyone. The meeting is now closed.